Welcome everyone to my short talk on the ideation process and methods. Originally prepared for LUT Venture Program kickoff in 2020. So to introduce myself, I'm Antero Kutvonen. I come from LUT University, where I work in two roles as a researcher and teacher in the School of Engineering Sciences, where I teach innovation management, open innovation, and associated things. And I also work on research services, where I practice what I teach and set up collaborations with European and domestic companies and other research groups in advancing science for the benefit of society. Let's start with a riddle. If we combine deep, intimate knowledge of physics and a milk chocolate bar, how does that lead us into profit? Now, there might be some steps missing in between, so let me go ahead and make it easier. If I add in an additional element of the equation, that is a military-grade radar station, I believe it should be much clearer. Maybe some of you already know what I'm hinting at. Of course, the combination of physics, a military-grade radar station, and a run-of-the-mill chocolate bar is not exactly the magical machine for profit. It is rather the beginning of an idea. And ideas, even though it might seem like that while watching the startup hype and some of the new media on these technological fronts, an idea is not exactly an immediate route to profit. What is needed in between is what we will discuss here as well today, and what is going to actually be the bulk of your work going forward. That is to have a systematic structure, to have methods, and to have a process by which that idea is refined, by which it is transformed into a concept, by which you are able to account for the market realities and the technological possibilities and transform it into, for instance, a microwave that produces profit. Now, of course, this story and the equation is based on the notion that at a point in time in history, there was a officer in the military who had a real sweet tooth, had a real hankering for milk chocolate bars. He had a habit of bringing those to work with him to the radar station, but was time and time again disappointed that they melted down in his pocket. And after consulting a friend of his over lunch, a physicist, mentioning this very happenstance and how he couldn't make sense of it, as if he carried the chocolate bar in his pocket elsewhere, everything was fine and it remained nice, hard, and edible. But when he brought it with him to work, where the temperature was not that different, it melted in his pocket each time. And then the physicist figured out that there might be a connection, and this is how the idea was born. But in order to make the idea into a microwave, years of development had to pass in between. But the end result was, the savior of modern student cuisine as we know it. So the morale here is that you need to both combine distant things in imaginative, novel ways to reach ideas that none of the people have necessarily thought about before, or alternatively, you can have ideas that none have had the capability to refine or formulate into a product level concept as of yet. So here we will be really discussing the ideation part of things. We will have a rough run of the talk where first ideas as such are discussed, and then how companies have an ever-increasing need of them, and how the companies actually go about producing these ideas and collecting them, and then and then end up with some tools that you can use when you are engaged in the production of ideas yourselves. Firstly, ideas as the raw material for value creation are really the foundation of modern economy. Ideas, by their definition, are conceptions, thoughts, notions, inventions, or solutions to a problem. They are the mental abstract image of an object. So they're very immaterial, intangible, fleeting things. But these intangible assets, basically knowledge, make up more than 87% of a modern day firm's market value. Think on companies like Amazon, Google, even Walmart. Most of their market value is tied up in intangible assets, in various forms of knowledge of their markets, knowledge of the technologies they have, their patents, their brand, their knowledge and information that they have about their customers, and how to exploit that best. This is the real source of value these days, which is entirely different from 50 years ago, where most of the value was still tied up in tangible, countable assets like stocks in an inventory. So value is really created by new ideas and new ways to use existing assets. Therefore, the really valuable part of any business is that which resides in the head of its employees. Since the 1980s, knowledge overall has become widely distributed, distributed over the value chain, distributed over vast geographic areas, and distributed over wide masses of people. Many factors came into this, from globalization to the rising education levels of people, as well as, of course, information and communication technology. Taking all of these megatrends together, the end result is that where previously you could identify a handful of people that would be extremely valuable to the generation of new knowledge, now you have hundreds and thousands of people, each of who have the capability to contribute with groundbreakingly important ideas, and you have no means to fully identify them all or be aware of all of their existence. Therefore, a new type of innovation management was needed to cope with this radical change in the scenery, and that was called open innovation, which happens to be my focus academically. So companies set about to source external ideas. They figured out that if the base of valuable ideas is spread wide and across the value chains, across their competitors, their collaborators, across their customers, they need not only rely on the team of experts at their disposal, but they should reach out to source in even more external ideas. In a word, the companies became hungry for new ideas and new inputs, much like the companies that you are working with today. Established companies have an edge in certain cases. They have good structures and good routines that help them bring the systematic processing of knowledge into play. They have very good mechanisms for eliminating ideas. But the core part of why that is not sufficient is that all of these mechanisms and all of these structures do not necessarily boost creativity and do not increase the influx of novel ideas and the radicalness of those ideas. And actually, in many cases, the useful ideas may be simple or obvious. They may even be old ideas that have been invented before and never succeeded only because the circumstances were different. Maybe a certain technology or certain action has gone below a critical cost point, thus making old ideas new again. And all of these tend to get easily discarded in corporate processes. So how do companies manage their ideation? As it is highly different from managing the systematic development of an already identified concept. This is called the fuzzy front end of innovation, or fuzzy front end of new product development. It precedes a structured new product development process that then would be all about sticking to schedules, sticking to budget, reaching milestones in time, etc. The fuzzy front end is about trying to construct freedom in a structured corporate environment. It starts from the identification of unfulfilled market needs. These may come from the marketing department, from customer feedback, or from salespeople, for instance, or the identification of untried technological opportunities, maybe resulting from your own R&D staff, maybe from seeing your competitor do something new, or maybe even from reading academic journals that point towards new, exciting basic research being done. And eventually, however it starts, it ends with a decision whether to fund a given idea forward to new product development and to the structured process of innovation, or whether to not fund the idea and rather discard it or store it for later use. Ideation is a big part of this process, but it's also heavily about selection. And in selection, there are two ways in which companies can go wrong. They can have false positives, where they become overly enthusiastic about some new idea, and false negatives, where they discard ideas that are actually inherently valuable, such as the case of the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, where the engineers discovered things like PDF formats for files, and those were discarded as immaterial to the copy machine business that Xerox was in. The same engineers later left and formed Adobe, which is actually doing quite nicely even today, as we all know. Overall, the fuzzy front end and how it is managed is the most influential part in determining new product development costs and success rates. So it is by no means a phase to be lightly neglected. A kind of, to give a ballpark figure, in a well-managed innovation process, you require 60 ideas at the start, out of which about 12 would get selected for further concepting. And after preliminary studies, 6 would proceed to development. Again, only half of those would proceed to prototyping, and maybe one of those would reach the market relatively successfully, I hope. And that is in a well-managed innovation process, and those are not necessarily in place at all organizations. So the need for ideas vastly outnumbers the need for new products. So if quantity is so required, what can be done about this? To run the fuzzy front-end process, previously, you found that you would have principally your own teams working in R&D that would be leaned on to generate most of the ideas. Nowadays, you figure that these guys will end up not generating the amount and the divergence of ideas that you need to survive in business. So you need to turn elsewhere. You need to turn to external sources and bring in ideas from the surrounding environment. So where are all these good ideas coming from? It becomes the big question. All the ideas at their ultimatum come from one place, and that is creativity. Creativity is the ability of individuals to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, and relationships, and to create meaningful new thoughts and connections, imbued with originality or imagination. So this means two things. It's also to go beyond the usual norms and to question the extant structures, the extant limitations, and also to create meaningful new connections, new thoughts, to combine pieces of information or contexts that by combination become novel again. Ideation is the act of problem solving at its heart by utilizing creative and divergent thinking, combined with a lack of criticism and a license to dream. Traditionally, you would try to find starting points for creativity in traditional source of ideas, such as looking at your current suite of products, looking at what your competitors are doing, looking at the technology which is at your disposal or which is becoming commonplace in the industry, looking at what the customers are doing, how their habits are changing, how their behaviors are shifting, what are the new needs that they are displaying. And all of these are very good and valuable places to start. But you have to go beyond simple brainstorming. Brainstorming is often seen as the Hollywood version of solving problems creatively. You just put a group of people into a room and you say that, okay, every idea is a good idea, start creating. And then you give them lots of coffee and energy drinks and they go off the rails and find out the new next big thing. This is often done, and this is often the starting point, but at its heart, it's a brute force approach. It tries to overcome the problem by sheer quantity of ideas, not being limited by negative input. But there are more sophisticated and more advanced ways of going about this once you have exhausted what is capable by brainstorming. You can add new perspectives to look at the problem from different ways. You can improve ideation by thinking about the problem from the commercial point, from the corporate point. What is the problem in the company's mind? Then you can switch the perspective, think about what's the problem in the regulator's mind, what's the problem from the viewpoint of the customer, what's the perspective that gives you the newest ideas. Then you can think about creativity techniques. There are multiple creativity techniques that can be easily researched by going into the literature. I will talk about a few of them in the following. You can also look at biomimicry, which is the act of copying the best solutions that nature has to offer. For instance, in Olympic swimming gear, one of the big advances was when finally scientists turned to biomimicry, and for the swimming suits implemented a combination of copying nature and the skin of a shark and its fine structure and the new technical opportunities afforded by nanotechnology in building nanotechnological swimming suits that had the surface texture that was similar to what a shark has, thus decreasing friction and improving hydrodynamics significantly. You can also do patent searches. Most of the knowledge, technological knowledge in the world is free and available to use with no cost within the patent databases. more than 4/5 of the knowledge there is already free of charge. Either the patent protection is already obsolete because it has passed its time, or then the responsible parties have not kept up with the maintenance fees. In any case, a well-informed search through the patents can really reveal very valuable information. Open innovation, that is turning to your customers, to your stakeholders, to your competitors, collaborators, working together in different ways to solve common problems, is a very powerful tool. It is becoming a fixture of corporate innovation. Working in groups, combining the individual ideas, and iterating on each other's best ideas are valuable ways forward. However, once you have this massive store of ideas, what needs to still be done is to select them. And in this selection, you need to have the capability to evaluate the ideas both from commercial and technical aspects, and from the capabilities that the company would have in deploying these from these standpoints. Is there a market? Do we have the technical expertise required to actually develop this? What would the business be like? That's a key question. Some of the ideation techniques include, for instance, TRIZ has the theory of inventive problem solving that is originating from Russia. Is a powerful collection of different tools and methods, an entire philosophy of its own about pragmatic, creative problem solving, where we have done studies at LUT and found that utilizing even the simplest TRIZ techniques can lead to massive improvements in ideation. Also, as a general note, don't settle for the first idea. Ideation does not stop at one. As I mentioned before, it is largely a question about quantity at the beginning, as well as quality. So never settle for the first or the most obvious solution. Companies do this all the time. They face operational pressures that lead to picking the first sufficient, but often non-optimal solution, the first thing that works. For instance, look at the dots here. How many straight lines would you require to connect the dots? Well, the first obvious solution is to look at the dots and say, well, I think it's about 5 lines. That's what I can do. If I make a kind of spiral form with straight lines, I need 5 of them to reach every dot. Then you start to think a bit further outside of the box. If you make the lines a bit longer, don't stay within the box defined by the 9 bullets, because nobody said you have to. You can reach this with 3 lines. And maybe something more could be done. If you just break the rules, if you find the rules nonsensical to the problem, and you make a curved line, you can hit it with 1 line. That has to be the optimal solution. But it was not the first one. In working as a group, you can employ techniques like 6 hats of thinking. Group ideation overall leads to more and better ideas. This has been well established, especially in groups that have diversity and good communication skills. So it's not enough just to have a group of people together. You need to have a group of people who can actually communicate well. This means both speaking and listening and understanding what you have to say. Typically, groups form around people who have some noticeable similarities. So you may end up with similar types of people in the way they behave. This can be forcibly altered to increase the potential for creativity and divergent ideas by assuming roles, by stepping out of your current skin and taking a different type of hat. For instance, in a 6-person group, you could have the roles from 6 hats of thinking, where one of the group members is obsessed by process. Another one, only arguments ever based on facts. And then again, another one is the opposite, who only argues based on feelings and considers the feelings involved. Does this feel right? Am I feeling that this is a fair way to arrange the business? And then you have the black hat, which we, to be fair, have a high enough share in business anyways. Who is the cautious type, the risk-averse type, the one who thinks that the solutions of yesterday were generally better than today. I believe that if you have to discard one, you can get rid of the black hat fellow. A key tool of all in all is to understand the business model. And for this, I recommend using the business model canvas that is developed by Osterwalder and Pigner. They have a wonderful book about this called Business Model Generation. The business model, in short, is a way to depict the business of around a certain product or for a certain company by looking at 9 interlinked separate elements of it. By this, you can depict the entire rationale of how value is created, that is, what the company is doing to add value, how the value is delivered, that is, how this value is brought to the end customer, and how value is captured. This means which part and how of the value added is being retained by the company, is being captured as forms of revenue streams or other benefits. Successful business models have the character that they serve customers in a more complete way, or in a way that they have never been served before, maybe fulfilling needs that previously went unfulfilled, or fulfilling those needs in a much more convenient way. You can innovate on any of the elements being the value proposition. This is, what are you offering? What solutions are you providing to what of your customers' problems? To customer relationships, how do you structure your relationship with the customer? This is, for instance, something that you have seen great shifts in within the telecommunications market, with the industry that is responsible for your data connections, that previously didn't think much of the customer, and now they want to be almost related to them. They want to be their next best friend. You see a lot of the customer relationships being altered because these days we have a much higher capability of processing data from the customers and about the customers. So it makes sense to know them better and to form more intimate relationships to gain more data on the customers. Also, you can, a very common point of innovation is to innovate on the revenue streams. For instance, at some point, the Finnish rail service, VR, was heavily piloting and considering copying the pricing model of airlines, where you would have very dynamic pricing depending on the capacity of the trains that were departing. So if a train was relatively empty, you would get a ticket for dirt cheap. And if the train was approaching maximum capacity, it would end up costing astronomically more. Also, different ways to think about revenue streams can be to move to monthly subscriptions instead of paying for one-time services. Or you can even think about what the company is doing overall in the key activities sector, like in the case of Qualcomm, where they previously made mobile phones, then realized that the competition is getting crowded. So they trashed all of their manufacturing capability, saving hundreds of millions of annual costs, and instead found out that they have a patented technology that is going to be vital to the next generation of all mobile phones. So they moved up the value chain and started licensing out that technology to each of their previous competitors, thus increasing profits while cutting the costs. And of course, cutting costs also on the side of the company, as Ryanair has shown us, can be a powerful way to innovate on the business model. Overall, it is not only about thinking on which block to innovate, but it's also about how that influences everything else. So now we're nearing our end, so I want to just end with a few practical steps forward for you to get on with ideation. Firstly, look at the challenge that is in front of you. And before doing anything else, record your first thoughts, record your intuition, because many times our subconscious processing and our first intuition reveals a very good lead on where to go. If nothing else, it reveals what the other people would be thinking at first, potentially, about this. Secondly, do your research. You need to gather information on the company for who you are solving the challenge, on the competition that product or service is going to encounter, or what the company is encountering now, about the context in which your idea would be deployed, about the market which you are considering for your business to be built around that idea, and look at the other solutions that currently exist or that are coming up, that are out there from competitors. How do you stack up against them? Communicate constantly. When solving a challenge, I cannot stress how important it is to communicate to the point of exhaustion. Discuss in your group, discuss with the company, discuss with other experts, talk about things even to your friends and others, of course, if non-disclosure agreements are not in place, and try to find the route through discussion. Many people, if not most, process information most effectively in social interaction. This could involve you as well. Generate lots of ideas and alternative solutions. Don't settle for one. Do thought experiments. Try combining your different ideas and simplifying them until only the core remains, and then trying to combine them again. And finally, once you have excellent ideas, stack each of them against the business model. Pay attention to each element and pay attention to how each element interacts with the rest. It's simple. You just need to use your brain, but use all of it. Thank you.